Hello again and welcome back to the latest We Are Sunderland briefing with myself, Dom Shaw and Scott Wilson in association with our partners, the Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians. How are we, Scott? I think there's only one place to start. We'll get to it, but when I ask I suspect the answer is better than Illan Meslier on Friday night.
Oh, goodness me. Yeah, all good. All good, thanks, Tom. Top of the league going into the international break again. I mean, it's quite something, isn't it? But yeah, Friday night, I mean, wow. Well, you say where do we start? But clearly there's only one place to start, isn't there?
You described it as the craziest Sunderland moment, or the craziest moment, full stop, one-off moment you've seen in your 20-plus years covering football?
I think, I mean, the beach ball, that was what people were coming back with. And yeah, that's probably fair enough. Just in terms of sheer kind of shock factor and one-off, wow, I can't believe I've just watched that. The beach ball at the Stadium of Light, Darren Bent, is probably the only one that comes close. In terms of a goal, probably the nearest comparison is David De Gea chucking in Phil Bardsley's shot in front of the Stretford end, which obviously then led to the penalties, which then led to Sunderland getting to Wembley. That was a kind of, I can't believe that's just happened moment. And obviously that was a bigger game. But in terms of at the Stadium of Light, just the fact, 97th minute, it looked like the game was gone. Even when Browne prods the ball goals, I know this is kind of hindsight, but I sat next to the lad who was next to us in the press box, and I genuinely said, I can't believe he's just done that. Like, what's he done? Thinking, what's he trying to do there? And I actually then put my head back down to my laptop because on the final whistle, it's, the report's written, it's all ready to go. It's an amazing moment. It's a journalist's nightmare, 97th minute, having to redo everything. And then, like Alan Browne said, he said he looked away, and it was just the sense from the noise of the crowd that something strange had happened. I was exactly the same. Looked up, and the ball is just trickling into the net. And even for a split second there, it's like, what's just happened? And I suspect there's a lot of fans that are like that as well.
Have you watched it back, and have you heard the commentary, the Sky commentary?
Yeah.
Because I thought that was one of those moments where the commentary just summed it up.
Yeah.
What have you done? And that's the kind of instinctive reaction, I think, from everyone watching in the stands and there, and obviously at home. And the other thing I've seen, as so often kind of does the rounds nowadays, is video clips from the Leeds end where. Yes. Browne touches it in the box, does the classic Ray, and then the instant moment.
Yeah. I mean, I've watched it back time and time again, and I still don't really know what's happened.
Well, that was going to be my next question. What actually happened?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the suggestions that there was something on the pitch. I don't think that's right. I haven't seen anything that conclusively proves to me that the ball has hit something or anything like that. And then, I mean, what I haven't seen, and apologies if anyone has, and I'd like to see it if anyone has, is absolutely bang on behind the flight of the ball to be able to tell if it's spun off really sideways, because it doesn't look like it does. Every angle that I've seen of it, maybe it jumps a little bit higher than you would think that it would. But, we're not talking Shane Warne to Mike Gatton here, are we? It hasn't spun sideways. Let's be absolutely honest. So I still don't really know how he's done it. Wow, what an error. But I mean, I've seen kind of people say, in the fullness of time, listen, it's just an early season game against Leeds. It doesn't really matter, blah, blah. Yeah, that's fine. But in terms of a one-off moment, it's one of those that if you were at that game, you're never, ever going to forget that moment. And it will be replayed years and years and years to come as, one of the great goalkeeping bloopers and one of the great Stadium of Light moments. No doubt about that.
And even if it did spin, as you're saying there, ever so slightly, it's still a shocker from Meslier, isn't it? Because you still, I mean, I'm no keeper, Christ, but you still get your body behind it. You don't just go to kind of nonchalantly gather it as he did.
I mean, it's one of them where I think it's too easy for him, isn't it? It's such a routine catch that he clearly just hasn't really thought about it at all. And it's probably a combination of things. He's clearly taken his eye off the ball. Like you say, he's not got his body behind it. He's obviously thought, all I have to do is get this. The game's over. Let's get home, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, for it to go that badly wrong at that stage of the game, I've never seen anything like it. Like I say, the De Gea Bardsey one was the only one that really sprung to mind in terms of a keeper having an absolute shocker at such a critical late stage of a game.
What was your verdict then on the game? Because it's so easy, isn't it? Just to focus purely on that 96th, 97th minute horror show. It's clearly a good result given the context to go into the international break. But what was your verdict on the game as a whole?
Yeah, and I think that's where we do have to step back from it a little bit because, did Sunderland deserve to get something from that game? Yes, maybe. I mean, they had their moments. But I think objectively Leeds were the better side. I don't think you can deny that. Listen, Sunderland started like a house on fire, didn't they? The first 15 minutes, they were absolutely brilliant. They scored the goal, but they had 2 or 3 really slick, fast, incisive passing moves. Roberts looked like he was absolutely bang on it. Rig was making his breaks into the box. Job was here, there, and everywhere. The first 15 minutes, I was watching that thinking, my goodness, this is what Sunderland are at when they're at their best. They can take Leeds apart here. And then as we've seen in some games this season, the foot came off the pedal a little bit. Sunderland sat back. They kind of invited Leeds back into it. And for long periods in the first half, I think it's undeniable that Leeds were the better team. The goal felt like it was coming. Then I thought Sunderland rallied again towards the end of the first half. So I think level at half-time is probably about fair. But then obviously Leeds get the goal again at the start of the second half. And then while Sunderland were probably the team doing most of the pressing from that stage onwards, they didn't ask an awful lot of questions of Meslier. And I actually thought Leeds were a threat on the break. I mean, Leeds actually have missed an absolute sitter, haven't they, right at the end of that game to put it to bed. Again, that's got overlooked. It should have been 3-1, really, when they broke at the start of stoppage time. Sunderland had been pressing. It's a massive chance. They make a complete mess of it. And then obviously Sunderland get the equaliser. So, undoubtedly some positives from that performance. At times, I thought Sunderland attacked really, really well. Leeds are a good side. Let's make no bones about that. That front attack of Leeds, I thought Nonto was the best player on the pitch. I thought he was really, really good. But Sunderland did reasonably well against him, considering he played that well. And they kept going, which is massive. We see it time and time again. The number of late goals, not as dramatic as that, but the number of late goals there are in the Championship. Having a side that just keeps going, doesn't know when it's beaten. And I think as well, fair play to Le Bris. We actually asked him about it after the game, and he quite openly said, look, I'd rather lose a game 3-1, having a go to try and get back into it, than just sit back and accept it. And Sunderland did, Patterson was up for corners again. They were throwing everything at it. And in the end, maybe that was a factor in what happened. It got in Meslier's mind, whatever. But I think lots of positives, but had Sunderland lost that game, I don't think you could really have argued too strongly against it, because I think Leeds probably were the better side on the night.
You'd have probably taken a point beforehand.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it?
But it'll feel like more than that, won't it? Going into the international break, it'll feel like a lot worse than that for Leeds, but it'll feel like a lot more than that and a lot better than that for Sunderland now going into the 2-week stoppage, won't it?
Yeah, and I think, we spoke to Illan Browne about this after the game, and I think it's not just the fact that they've got a point and kept the unbeaten run at home going. Yeah, that's important. It's the fact that moment has brought everybody together, hasn't it? You've got the team celebrating by the corner flag with Luke O'Nien doing his blooming WrestleMania move over the top of everyone. You've got Le Bris, far more kind of outwardly emotional and passionate than we've probably ever seen him on the touchline. You've got the fans going absolutely bonkers. There's a feel-good factor in the city after the game. Everybody's talking about it over the weekend. I just think all of that is probably as important as the fact that they've actually got to point out the game and stay at top of the league. I think it just builds into this sense that, do you know what? Maybe this is a club that's going somewhere. Maybe this is a season where things are just going to fall into place. And in football, that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? How many times did we see Man United score last-minute goals because everybody thought they were going to? It becomes it starts preying on minds and things. And if Sunderland's players are going to go out thinking, do you know what? This is a season where even if we're getting beat, we'll find a way. The goals will go in. Then that becomes powerful in itself, doesn't it?
And in every memorable season, promotion winning, however it ends, really, in every memorable season from a positive sense, there's moments that you look back on, isn't there? And if this season ends well for Sunderland, then inevitably you look back on this, not just for the moment and the point, but for exactly what you're saying there, what it might do going forward.
Yeah, that was my kind of big takeaway from it. That, do you know what? When things like that are happening, maybe it's just meant to be. And there's an awfully long way to go yet. And Sunderland are going to have to play better to get over the line and all this. We know all that, but it just feeds that sense that something's brewing here. And you do feel that, don't you? Again, we were kind of saying it to Alan Browne afterwards, and Browne, to be fair, was kind of saying, yeah, that's all well and good. And yeah, we don't want to downplay that, but it's only October. I've been in the Championship long enough. There's loads of games.
Come on, Alan. That's not what we want to
do. All of that. Yeah, fine. Fully understand that. But I think as fans, you're coming away from that game thinking, God, maybe this is our year. And that's all you want, really, isn't it?
And as much as like that sort of stuff that you're saying there is exactly what you'd expect to hear from a footballer, there was loads of stuff in that Browne interview that is not what you'd expect to hear from a footballer. It was great, wasn't it? Like really personal and human.
It was good. He was really, really good. Just kind of just to hold his hands up straight away and said, God, I'm embarrassed to claim that. What was I doing? It was,
I'm embarrassed to claim that, but I'm good.
But I'm good because I want the goal bonus. Yeah, I enjoyed that from him. I really enjoyed that from him. We kind of said when we were in there, you do realise this has gone down as an own goal, don't you? And he was devastated. He didn't realise it. So he was like, yeah, well, that's going to change.
The goal bonus explains the Portsmouth moment, doesn't it?
Doesn't it just? Yeah, well, that's it. He scored 2 this season, and you couldn't have got 2 kind of crazier goals, really, could you? But he does come across as a really kind of nice guy, slightly more serious. He comes across as a nice guy, but I thought there were 2 elements to that kind of chat we had with him, which were really interesting. Firstly, when we talked to him, about his role in the team, because he'll have come into this team expecting probably to be starting week in, week out. He was the experienced figure that they were bringing in. He's obviously, had a really good decade or so at Preston. But he was saying, look, these players are the real deal. I've seen plenty, and I look at Rig, and I look at Job, and I look at Dan Neil, and I just think you are top players. Again, he's kind of going to say that, isn't he? But I definitely think that he meant it. And I definitely think that he's had his eyes kind of open just about how good these young players are. And then also he was quite interesting when he spoke about Regis Le Bris. We're going to be, I think those quotes will be knocking about a bit later in the week, but watch out for them on the site because, he clearly is a massive fan of just how detailed Le Bris is in everything he does, whether it's a training session that he's putting on for a very specific reason, whether it's the tactical plan that he comes up with for a very specific opposition. Again, it's difficult because I think what he was keen not to do was suggest that whoever he worked under at Preston wasn't doing that. And it's unfair to suggest that because that's not what he was suggesting at all. I think what he was just saying is, look, this guy is so detailed and so kind of tactically sharp that I'm learning stuff off him every day. And I thought that was really interesting.
When we look back on this chunk of games then between international breaks, the first one was obviously perfect. The first chunk of games.
Yeah.
This one was always going to tell us a lot more, wasn't it? It's been a testing run, really. When you look back, there was the Plymouth defeat, the Middlesbrough win, the Watford defeat, the Derby win, and then the Leeds draw. What has that chunk of games told us about Sunderland?
I think it's told you that they're going to be bang there, personally. Certainly if they can keep the team fit. I mean, the 2 defeats you've talked about there, could easily have been draws or wins. It's not like Sunderland have been comprehensively outplayed in either of those games. They've given away a couple of sloppy goals that they didn't do in the first chunk of the season. But you know that's going to happen over the course of a season. But you know they've been banging both of those games, and then you know they've won a tight game against Middlesbrough, but in a very, very controlled and professional manner. They've scrambled a draw against Leeds in kind of crazy circumstances. But that, you know, I still think that's a creditable result against a promotion challenger. And they've, you know, produced a very polished professional home win in a game you'd expect them to win against Derby. So, you know, I think it's been a really, really positive chunk again. You know, it has to be. They're there at the top of the league. And I think what it's shown is obviously that, you know, the longer this goes on, the more you have to say this side is absolutely, you know, are absolutely credible promotion contenders. And that's what I take away, I think, from this last chunk, that as long as, you know, we still have to say there are question marks about the depth of the squad. We still haven't seen, a number of the players who came in the summer. Is Alexic going to have any kind of an impact? When Samed going to be back? What's going on with that injury? There are questions, and there would be concerns still, I think, if Sunderland were to get a glut of injuries. But all things being equal, I see absolutely no reason why this side won't remain credible promotion challengers for the rest of the season.
And on the squad depth, we have a couple of answers there, because you've lost Adji Elise just before the break. Obviously, he was ruled out before the Portsmouth game, but you've since had Dan Ballard, who picked up the injury against Plymouth and hasn't played or hasn't started for 4 games since. Well, Chris Meffam's come in and been excellent there. And then you've still got Leo Hjelde kicking his heels on the bench. And we spoke to Le Bris about Hjelde a couple of weeks ago. And Le Bris has been pretty ruthless and honest, hasn't he? When he doesn't fancy a player, he kind of says, doesn't he? Look, he can go on loan, he's available. Well, he was emphatic, really, in his response on Hjelde. He's still very much part of my plans. He has a role to play. Well, you think he's 5th choice centre-half at the minute. But he clearly still rates him. And then I think the other thing, because going into the break, one of the big question marks was clearly still up front. Mayenda had started well, but could he cope? What happens if there was an injury? You didn't want to think that, but we have had an answer there. I think Isidore's probably been surprisingly positive. And you've also now got Aaron Conley. Now, clearly there's question marks over Conley. Hasn't played a lot of football, has had a fair few moves that hasn't worked out. But can only judge it really on what we're told at this stage, and the noises are positive, aren't they? So I think we have a kind of couple of reassuring messages on the depth of the squad, really, and how some of them might cope with setbacks that are inevitably going to come along the way.
Yeah, I think in terms of individual players, I think you're absolutely right. I think the 2 big positives of this last chunk have been Meffam and Isidore, because they're the 2 that have had to come in to plug gaps. Starting their Sunderland career from scratch, if you like. But as you rightly say, Meffam's slotted in pretty seamlessly at the back. And, you know, to the extent that I'm not entirely sure now that you can absolutely say that it's going to be Ballard and 09 if everyone's fit for the rest of the season. And it's as simple as that. I think, you know, Meffam has undoubtedly put himself in that mix. Alazy will put himself back in that mix when he comes back. So I think there are decisions to be made there. At the other end of the field, yeah, you're right. You know, could Isidore come in? What happened if Mayenda was out? You know, were we going to have to be back to a position where Job's a square peg in a round hole up front? Well, no, Isidore's shown he can do that job. And then, like you say, there's Connolly to come in. And, I think that's where the break has probably come at a pretty good time for Sunderland, because in the immediate aftermath of that game on Friday night, Le Bris was saying that come the end of the international break, Ballard, all things being equal, should be fit. Mayenda should be back. Connolly should be up to speed. He's going to be playing for the under-21s probably a couple of times during this fortnight. And Alexic should be a lot nearer, although clearly there's the worry with Alexic that he'll go away with Serbia and not play again. And you know, he desperately does need match minutes. He probably could have done with playing in those under-21 games that Connolly's going to be playing in. But whatever happens, you've got 3 or 4 players who come the end of the international break are either going to be in the squad for the first game back against Hull, or, you know, not far off. And suddenly then the squad straight away just looks that bit deeper and stronger, doesn't it?
And just before we wrap up, we'll do this next week, look ahead, but just an early glance. Hull away, Luton away, Oxford home, QPR away, Preston away. I know football doesn't work like this. I know the Championship doesn't work like this. But that looks kinder than the most recent run of games did when you consider there was Borough, Watford and Leeds in there and we're all going well at the time.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of away games, clearly. That's what's kind of standing out to me. And, you know, Sunderland have obviously lost at Plymouth and they've lost at Watford. So, you know, it'd be interesting to see how they do because, you know, away games are a test in the Championship, aren't they? No matter who you're playing against, a Championship away game asks very different questions of you than playing at home. So, you know, I think it'll be interesting to see how Sunderland do in those away matches. But, you know, you're right. In terms of the opposition that they're playing against, then the majority, if not all of those teams, are in the bottom half of the table, aren't they? So, you know, you'd like to think that there are, you know, there's definite potential for Sunderland to take a lot of points out of those matches. I do just think it's going to be interesting to see how they cope with, you know, a run of away games. I mean, Hull away feels like one of those Championship games where it could kind of be anything. Then you go to Luton, who have been horrendous, you know, surprisingly bad. But Kenilworth Road away in a week when you've already played away, it's never going to be easy, is it? So, you know, I think there'll be challenges there. But you are right, you know, in terms of the opposition that you're playing, then on paper, it looks kinder than the chunk that they've just come out of.
Because I realise this might be like digging deep for criticism that isn't there really, and especially when you consider that Sunderland have just got a draw in the most unlikely circumstance at the weekend. But you kind of alluded to it earlier. When you look back to those Watford and Plymouth games, Sunderland should have came out with a point in those games, yeah. and that has to be in your makeup as promotion contenders, doesn't it? Going and being able to grind something out from a game rather than losing it. And as I say, I know that sounds daft given what happened on Friday night, but I think the point still stands when you look back at those two away games.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that, yeah, that's the next test, isn't it? Can they, because thus far, when they've been winning away from home, they've generally completely dominated games against pretty poor opposition. You'd certainly say the Cardiff game at the start of the season.
Portsmouth was the same.
And Portsmouth was the same, wasn't it? So you're right, you know, in a much tighter away game, can they either get over the line and find a way to win it, or like you say, at the very worst, scrap their way and come away with a point and say, well, we'll take that. I think that's probably going to be the test and the question that they need to answer in the next chunk. But, you know, there's no better way to be going into that than sat at the top of the table, is there?
Exactly. We'd have taken that before the start of the season. You'd have taken that in the last international break.
You'd have taken that in the 97th minute on Friday night.
Let us know in the comments, by the way, is that the craziest moment you've ever witnessed, sat in the stands or watching from home from a Sunderland perspective? Because that's a good future vid.
It is, yeah. I'll be interested to know what we've missed, because there's always some you forget about, isn't there? But
yeah, of course there is.
Certainly in the Stadium of Light era, I'm racking my brains and struggling.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's one of those that, as you say, you don't forget in a hurry. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks, as ever, as we said at the start, to our partners, Cost Specs Opticians and the Fans Museum. Do shout up with those crazy moments that spring to mind when you look back on your time supporting Sunderland. And obviously shout up in the comments as well if there's anything you want us to discuss in future vids and pods. We'll be back next week, the second week of the international break, to look ahead to the fixtures to come where Sunderland will return top of the Championship. Thanks again for joining us. Take care.